church. And I said, well, what's the building on the left? And he said, that's where I used to go to church.
That's great. That's pretty funny. I feel like there's a sermon in there.
Yeah.
So I learned this awesome, so like I was at Gathering Days 2 weeks ago, and so one night at dinner I was talking to a couple other students, and we came across a phrase that says, I can preach that. So when they come across a situation, it's like, I can preach that. It's an awesome phrase. But anyways, are we recording?
We're on.
We're on. Fantastic. So conflict. So I went and looked up the word conflict. That's what I like to do when I get started on doing stuff. So I like to have a base and then kind of build from it. And so it's a serious disagreement or an argument. And then the verb form is incompatible or at variance or clashing. So, which I think the word conflict brings to mind, right? No one's really surprised by that definition. Conflict, people butting heads, I guess is a good way to put it. We've all had someone who has disagreed with us, right? No, I don't think we've ever been in that situation where, like, everything's perfect. Except for Sarah.
I've never had that.
She's never had anyone disagree with her whatsoever. Not at all.
Wow.
And so, 3 weeks ago we talked about your DISC profiles, and 2 weeks ago you got the results of your Myers-Briggs. And so those kind of they do play into effect here in a way, because some personalities just kind of don't get along all too much, or it takes much more energy to try to get along. And that's not kind of the point of having you take them, is so you can understand where you're at and how you are going to relate to someone else. It's a lot easier in the DISC profile because there's only 4. And so you can look at that graph and say D and I, right, are the opposite corners. No D and C?
D. It's S or C, I can't remember.
So, yeah, they're on opposite sides. So you know the two of y'all are going to have similar way of doing things, is what that boils down to.
See, I think that should be required for any couples getting married. Just because I can look at over the time of years that I've been married, we've gotten through that. We've done Myers-Briggs without doing Myers-Briggs.
So y'all weren't surprised.
But it's through the clashes, and just getting through it and that. So I think that would be a great thing to do, because I look at, you just start to say, "Guy, if I just approach this a little bit different with my wife, we probably would have avoided a lot of the conflict we have."
Yeah. And that's something, when I was preparing for this evening, I thought about marriage as like a great example of conflict, because you get into a lot of conflicts, and there's like a number of ways to deal with them. So conflict causes tension, I think, is the ultimate. Where I was trying to go there, and Joe's like, clashes or tension in a marriage are a great example of that. And the fact of the matter is, when you have a large group, there's always going to be some sort of tension somewhere. Maybe not at first. Maybe it's going to take some time to build up. But with any group or number of people, you're going to have people who just don't see eye to eye completely. They don't have the same way of doing things. One likes to make pro-con lists. The other person says, let's just go do something. And so you're going to have a disagreement and some tension. And based on, this is kind of my personal experience and observations on conflict, but things end up going one or two ways. They either, the parties split, never to resolve their issues, or in which case you don't really get this, there's no resolution, so they're continually fighting, or they talk about it and they resolve that conflict. Oh, I turn this, there we go, there's my problem.
Back, yeah.
I was like, that doesn't make sense. Okay, here we go. Other parties recover and they grow closer and stronger together because they better understand each other and their differences. And that's due to the breaking down of walls that we all have, barriers, whatever you want to call them. It's the things we put up to protect ourselves, just through life experiences that we have to do. And laying those down help us relate to each other through our feelings and the way of thinking, how we think. So what it's about is relationships, whether it's friendships, boyfriend, girlfriend, romantic. It's all about relationships. And the church is filled with a lot of relationships, a lot of personalities, as you learned a couple weeks ago. I'm sure we were all different on the Myers-Briggs scale. Yes, I was not here, not as much.
It was a little bit surprising, I think, that we had maybe like 5 or 6 people, all with the exact same Myers-Briggs type.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
The men. It was the men.
Really?
No,
I
I
have
was
no clue what
You
that
were
means.
in there, right?
I was in there because
She was.
What are y'all?
You're one of the guys.
What was it?
No,
One of the guys.
So y'all all the same?
ISTJ.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, ISTJ.
Wow, guys.
Well, which caused all kinds of questions, like, does this type of a class attract a certain personality type? Is it the reflection? I mean, a lot of times, like, there's all kinds of methods of leadership, and what kind of leadership attracts what kind of followers or that sort of thing. So
Huh.
it could be any
Fascinating.
one of those.
Wow. So maybe we all get along more than we think we do. But not always. So we're always going to have a time where we're going to disagree with each other. And so whether this conflict between staff members or lay members or staff and lay members can go any sort of direction. And the goal is ultimately to have a healthy relationship, so a healthy church environment for us all. And so we have to ask ourselves, how are our relationships within this? And to have the right relationship, it all begins with you, with me, you as the individual, not when you look out into conflict. So you can never change another person, right? No?
Change yourself.
You can.
You can change yourself, and you can change the way in which you respond to someone else. Yes. So, conflict has ruined a lot of churches. I don't have any first-hand stories, but it does happen, obviously, because that internal conflict comes out, and then one of a couple of things will happen. The community surrounding will hear about it and avoid the church, or those inside the church are frustrated, fed up, whatever those feelings are, and not invite anybody new because they don't want to bring anyone into that environment. And those things are not good for the church, obviously. So conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. Conflict reminds us we all have something to contribute because we're all different, and that's where this conflict comes from. And we need the whole body, the whole community, to respond to the needs of our community and to each other. But where conflict does get bad is when we don't deal with it correctly or positively. So how do you handle conflict well? And that's kind of like the all-important question. And so first we need to understand the ways in which we usually confront conflicts. So the first is, I'll show them, which is kind of someone's right and someone is wrong. And we have zero need to talk about it. So it's kind of win-lose. And no one likes being the loser. All right? No one loves being a loser. We actually, has anyone ever noticed you tend to focus on those moments where you lose or you fail more? Yeah? Mm-hmm. There's actually a term for that, and I did not know this. It is the Zeigarnik, some psychologist. It's spelled Zeigarnik. So the brain remembers incomplete tasks or failures longer than any success or completed activity. Once a project is complete, the brain no longer gives it priority or active working status. Tension and failure have no closure. Thus, the brain continues to work on them. So it's kind of like, anyone have a to-do list? And you complete it, you delete it, you're done, but you have those things working. So your brain looks at failure and tension as a working task. It's something that is incomplete, not finished, something that has to keep focusing on. And you get this all the time, like in pop culture. So favorite TV show, you get to the end of the episode, to be continued, or that cliffhanger at the end of a season. Yeah, keeps you coming back because they recognize your brain's not going to forget about it. It's going to want to know what happens. You gotta finish it. And it's the same reason, maybe me, if you take a test, so you focus on the 2 you got wrong more than the 98 you got right. Right?
Yeah.
We tend to focus on how we lose. And eventually this just leads to an unhealthy relationship. No one, a splitting of ways, because you don't seek that closure. You don't seek of rebuilding that relationship within. And so just think about if that's happening in a church setting, in a ministry setting, the losers aren't going to want to be around. They're not going to want to be here if they feel ousted, or because it's going to constantly be on their mind.
My turn? Yeah. So the second response to conflict, we kind of dubbed, I'll get out. Okay, so this response is somebody gets so uncomfortable, they're just like, I'm out. I'm just going to, instead of confronting or instead of even forming any sort of bridge here, I'm just going to leave. I'll avoid, I'll withdraw, and that's no good because then when someone just gets out, you lose their perspective completely, right? So sometimes this looks like where someone actually does get out in the church. It looks like someone left the church, right? They physically got out. But sometimes it's a little bit more subtle than that, where they're still in the church, but they're holding back on their voice. They no longer speak up. So literally, you're missing out on the gifts that they might bring to something. But most of the time, this has been my experience, is that it'll show up in a really subtle way that you won't notice unless you're really checking up on it, which is contributions, financial contributions, right? So if someone is saying, well, I'll just get out, I'm going to withdraw my gift, my money, but I'm still here. So, but, I mean, that's like a really tangible expression of you're going to miss out on what I have to offer. And it's just representative of the rest of the problem when someone says, well, I'll get out.
The next is I'll give in. So you have a group of friends and you want to play hide and go seek, but everyone else wants to play tag. So you give in and you're going to play tag. That's kind of like a really basic example, but that's what it is. It's the friendship approach. So you're going to give in to the other side. You're going to smile. You're going to nod and say, yeah, I agree, even though internally you don't. Because you don't want the pain. You don't want the idea. And then you start to feel like you're never listened to. Is that about right for everybody? You don't, even though you're not speaking up, you don't feel listened to when everyone else goes with their idea instead of yours. And then resentment grows. It kind of festers. That's a good way to put it. It festers. It grows, and eventually you're going to get angry. And we all know what Yoda says about anger, right?
I don't.
I have no idea either.
I don't know that one.
What? Anger leads to the dark side, guys. Well, anger leads to hate. Hate leads to fear. Fear leads to the dark side. Come on, people. That's all right. I forgive you. We're going to watch it at the end of this. We're all going to watch Star Wars together, guys.
No,
Yeah.
not happening.
Closing activity.
Not happening.
Me and Paul talked about this, actually.
Oh.
This was heartbreaking. When I heard...
Okay, speaking of conflict, then there's I'll meet you halfway, right? So this is the compromise method of dealing with conflict, which I gotta say sometimes really works, right? So there have been times when you listen to each other, you say, all right, we'll do this, and we'll do that, and that's a little bit of what you want, and that's a little bit of what I want. I was thinking, gosh, this is marriage right here. This is whatever, like even back when I had roommates, like we did that a lot. Like we'll do it your way on this one, but we'll do it my way on the other one. And actually, sometimes, doesn't that end up sort of creating a bridge? Sometimes it ends up creating something new out of the two sides. Sometimes you end up learning something or discovering something that you never would have before because you really listened and tried to embody what someone else really cared so strongly about. So that can be a really good thing about this half and half method. But the drawback, I think, to it, especially as we're talking about organizations, we're talking about the church, is that sometimes there really is a definite direction of the leadership. And so the half and half just won't work. I actually think that our worship services is a great example of this because, I'll just share very openly about the decision to go to the different times of the worship service. I fought it tooth and nail. If you think about just like from a leadership perspective, it's an entire lifestyle change, right? Mm-hmm. Staff, it's your whole day on Sunday as opposed to we're going to get everything done in the morning and then we can rest. It's a totally different new thing. So we try to avoid taking that on if we at all possibly could. Plus, knowing that it's going to be disruptive. And so there was a lot of half and half going on. When I came here, there were 2 services in the morning, and there wasn't enough space. So we did what we could to, we don't really want to move too much, and we know that this one service is really strong, and folks desire to see one another. There's a strong sense of community that we don't want to break up. That's really important. So we're going to keep that half, if you will, and then we're going to bring in this other piece of we really have a need for having a 3rd service so that there's enough space for new people to come in. So that's when we started at 8, 9:30, and 11. And we finally came to a head where the half and half was not going to fit the vision anymore. And we could no longer follow the vision if we continued to do the half and half. And so that's why it's not always the answer. You can't always compromise on everything. At some points there becomes a leadership decision that we have to go all the way one direction. Okay.
Yeah. All right, number 5. This is the important one, is I care enough to confront. So not only care enough for the person, but care for their ministry. And this is how we really deal with conflict in a healthy way. And we've got some steps about how we do that, because the overall goal is healthy relationships. Remember? And so it's not just to kick out the loser or the people we don't agree with. It's we want relationships. We want to be able to come together even in our conflict and unhappiness. So if I can get someone to read Matthew 18, 15 through 17. You have to find it. I did not prepare and mark it. Sorry. Oh, you have it? Look at her. She got a Bible, guys. Look at that.
What a novel idea.
Matthew 18, 15 through 17.
If another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the 2 of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have redeemed that one. But if you are not listened to, take 1 or 2 others along with you, so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If the member refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector.
Thank you. And so this is, I think Jesus is talking to his disciples here. Don't remember specifically. But it's all about how to deal with a person in conflict. And I love the last line, because you could probably take it. Let one be such as pagan and tax collectors. But Jesus hung out with pagan and tax collectors. You ate dinner with them. You broke bread with them. So in other words, don't avoid them. That's how I kind of took you into that. It's rebuild that relationship. Don't, yeah. Am I trying to page?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, fantastic.
You did that pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
30th page.
Yes.
He's really good at
Really
turning
good at turning
pages.
pages. Oh, and you've got
I don't
number
know
one.
why I brought mine up. I'm sorry. Okay, so as we're talking about, looking at the model of how Jesus dealt with conflict, what are some step-by-step actions that we can take as we're headed into dealing with conflict? And the first one is to check your motive, right? Have you seen the commercials? I love these commercials, like Snickers, I think it is.
Oh, yeah.
There's the Marilyn Monroe one,
yeah.
right? And who is it that's the first version of it? It's a guy, anyway.
Yeah.
It's a guy in the Marilyn Monroe dress and just being very, very angry at the cameraman and stuff. And why is this? It's just the dumbest idea in the world to have a woman in a white dress stand on a grate. Like, it is, And they come over and give him a Snickers bar. He takes a bite. And do you feel better, Miss Monroe? Oh, and then all of a sudden it's Marilyn Monroe, right? The hangry commercial. All right. So it's kind of like that. You find yourself getting all irritable and you're like, wait, am I hungry? Am I tired? This is the same sort of thing for conflict. Check your motive. What is really going on behind your anger, behind your frustration? Do you have a need for attention in this situation? Or do you have a need to be right? What if you're wrong? What if the other person's idea is right? One good way to check your motive is if you feel good in saying it, you're probably saying it with the wrong motive. Does that make sense? If you feel good and say, like, wow, this is really like fueling my fire, then you're probably wrong in saying it. I feel like this is a good concept to test out in some safe places. So maybe in some of your closest relationships, you will inevitably experience conflict. And so as you are encountering a conflict, you can kind of run this through your head. What's my motive right now? Right? Because it's easier to mess up in safer relationships. What's my motive right now? Am I really trying to be right? Or is there maybe a more important motive that I should be placing ahead of my own? Okay.
Number two is you plan your presentation. This is one that I am probably go overboard with because I like plan out everything in my head. Conversations, interviews, meetings, first dates, whatever it is, like what's going to happen, what can I say, what am I going to ask, anything. Yeah, laugh.
Have you?
I've done that.
Planning ahead. Thank you.
I was an elementary school teacher for a long time. But I would plan out, for parent-teacher conferences, I'd plan out scenarios. If they ask this, I'll say, back and forth. If this happens, I'm going to say this. And same way with some of the kids. If there's some conflict resolution, this is how I'll go.
Yep, that's exactly how I do that same thing.
Plan it out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because, and the other thing you don't want to do is you don't want to get into these serious conversations while you're tired, or you're hungry, or if you're in a hurry, like you're running out somewhere, it's like, I don't have time to talk right now. And then it's probably best to avoid sarcasm. It might depend on who you're talking to. But generally, I'm willing to bet sarcasm is not a good thing. You don't, you got to think of a pleasant way to say some of these things. And I personally think conversations dealing with conflict or serious ones need to be in person or over the phone. Today's technology, we kind of get away from that. Text, email, what have you. I'm sure there's something new. Snapchat. Do you all know what that is? I don't use Snapchat. Yeah, there's a multitude out there. And I think because the way that what you engage somebody in conflict speaks a lot of volume, just as much as in the way in which you present. When you prepare to talk, you prepare the location, the setting, your attitude, and how you approach it. So it's a good, like, for example, a big language difference would be, is you aren't hearing me versus let me try to explain that differently. Right? Those are two big different ones where you try to say something, you're obviously not listening or you're not hearing, well, let me try this another way then, because you're not getting what I'm saying.
So then the follow-up to that is to use affirmations. So as you're listening to what someone else is saying, the best thing to say is, I hear what you're saying. Or I find that we have this in common, affirming that you really do see them, you really do hear them. Conflict will happen in the church, and it does happen, and it can hurt, but it can be really beneficial. When there's tension, it's important to start from a place of unity instead of a place of differences. A funny example of this is, we have a little skit here. Funny example is a conversation I heard from a guy. Once I saw this guy on a bridge about to jump. And I said, don't do it.
Nobody loves me.
I said, God loves you. Do you believe in God?
Yes.
Me too. Are you a Christian or a Jew?
A Christian.
Me too. Protestant or Catholic?
Protestant.
Me too. What denomination?
Baptist.
Me too. Now wait, Northern Baptist or Southern Baptist?
Northern Baptist.
Me too! Northern Conservative Baptist or Northern Liberal Baptist?
Northern Conservative Baptist.
Of course, me too! Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes region or Northern Conservative Baptist Eastern region?
Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lake region.
Me too! Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1879 or Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912?
Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912.
Die, heretic. Okay, so it's a funny exaggeration, but it is what we do in times of conflict, right? We have tons of unity, but just this one tiny little difference can become larger than life. And it's that same line of thinking. So affirmations can be like anesthesia. A word of encouragement can do wonders. And I would encourage you to never use the word but. So, you're great, but. I'm having flashbacks to DVDs. When people hear but, they stop listening, right? Because then they're clamming up. Don't you do that? When you hear but, you're like, oh, they're going to attack. There's something wrong, right? Instead of saying but, we can start with an openness, and we can remove the defensiveness. Bless you. So try using the word and instead of but. So you're a great person, and I'm a teammate with you in this ministry. Can we look at some new options for next year? Or ask them a question. I thought what you did with that ladies' dinner was great and how you organized the night. What did you think? Is there anything you wish we would have done differently? So there's also a little bit of power sharing when we use the word and when we share affirmations. It's not just about our own agenda. It's about us working together. I think that's covered.
Fantastic. And then last is speak the truth in love. So we can often ignore issues because we're afraid of the consequences of hurting someone we care about, right? I mean, it's hard to tell someone that you love, you care about, you work closely with, someone that you spend Sunday mornings with, whatever it is, that closeness that brings you together. It's kind of like throwing a wrench in it or throwing a stick in a bicycle tire. You know, it could uproot it all and cause a lot of problems. But so I love Proverbs. Proverbs is a great book. If you ever need a book to study, Proverbs is a good one. In the end, people appreciate frankness more than flattery. And that's Proverbs 28:23. And that's not to say that when there is a problem, and that's kind of saying that, well, it's kind of ridiculous as the doctor saying, you don't need surgery because it's going to hurt you. Right? Surgeries hurt, but they're good for us. Does that make sense? That's the analogy I'm trying to make there. Fantastic. And our goal as a community is to have a place that when someone enters, they see our unity, they see our peace, versus us as a place of conflict and tension. And each of us, we're all responsible for that in one way or another. We're responsible for creating this atmosphere in which God can be found. Right? If you look at his command to pursue peace with everyone and the holiness without, no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and through it many be wounded. And that is Hebrews 12:14 through 15. So do you realize that when you deal with your frustration with someone, that many people can be wounded? When you roll your eyes, or when you speak to someone about they are there, they over there, they do this, their ministries. That you're inviting people into that frustration with you, into that conflict, into that tension. Our goal is to have no roots of bitterness to grow, to allow none of that. To be this example of love in a community, which is going to be extremely difficult when you have a large community, obviously. I think a great example of this was we took a poll in one of my classes because my professor's kind of experimenting with some new online hybrid class techniques, and he shared the results with them, and out of 40, because it's a large class, there's 40 of us, which has been very difficult for him and for us. There was no clear line. He's like, you're all over the place, and you wonder why, because you fill out the evaluations for your professors and you give feedback, and he goes, and you wonder why they don't change anything, because there's never a clear line. You guys are all over the place. So I can't change anything. What am I supposed to do when we're all over the place? And that's kind of how I picture the church sometimes, is we all have our opinions, we're all over the place, and as Sarah said, it's ultimately comes down to church leadership. Those are our leadership board, the staff members who look at their motives, are the motives of the church, the vision of the church, and the purpose going forward, and what's best for the growth in the surrounding community. So that's it. So we're going to spend the next 10 to 15 minutes in breakout groups, so continue discussion. And so these are a little tougher than, before we're talking about ourselves, now we're dealing with conflict. And feel free to share some personal examples. I'll move around to other different groups. But which of these points that we talked about tonight are the toughest for you personally? And if you want to talk about the specifics within our community of soul, please do on other aspects. That'd be great. But I was thinking about this. Tonight we dealt specifically how we confront an individual in conflict or tension. That was kind of our main focus. But I want you to also think what's appropriate in which you respond to being the one being confronted instead of the one doing the confronting. Because they're both important. I think how you choose to respond to being confronted is also equally as difficult as the one doing the confronting. So split up into groups of small groups, and that's what you want to talk about.
A sermon on Sunday in Missouri. I had been the director of the Christmas program. Never. And there's a woman that was to do the music. And the parents were complaining to me about her.
I think learning something I've noticed with
How do I
my
do
boy.
that?
I have
You know, how do I?
and a daughter.
So she was like,
Conflict, something I just
horrible
kinda
song.
noticed
It was just horrible. And the
And
kids
how I deal with them, there's
She
like
was
one,
mad at
there's
her.
not just one
You
way.
know, just
and it doesn't
And
work.
she didn't want them to have
Just
the
because it
words
works this way
in
doesn't
front
mean
of
it
them
works
or
this way.
anything. And
It's like, it's gotta be different.
so I just did the words
that,
and put them on the
just figuring out
anything.
how to deal with it
Put 'em
with the
up.
person.
Well, so when we had that sermon, she
When
came
you
to
can't
me,
figure
she
things
said
out,
to
I
me,
think that's what it is.
I forgive you for how
Yeah.
you
You know it's
treated
gonna work
me
in a particular
during
situation.
that time. And I couldn't say anything.
Or you have at least
I mean, I
one
couldn't
idea.
say,
Whereas
I was
some, you don't know.
protecting you from the parents. I couldn't say
You're
that.
just not
So I
willing-
just let her,
they're
and she
not good
cried, and
receivers
and
of
I was like, you know,
I look at
I'm sorry.
me.
And
To your credit, very
I
much
couldn't
for not-
say anything to her
Why,
because it
why
was
is
like,
it important? It bothers me. Why is it
you know, I
important?
mean,
I'm willing to deal with it.
There's no
Whatever,
need
and-
in conflict
And it,
to further
whether
the
it's in the church
well, and that was,
or to make
I
it
just
worse.
was
There's
like,
absolutely no need.
but you made me think of it again, like,
you
oh,
know,
Norma.
little stuff.
And the pastor
Is my
said,
spiritual growth.
don't ever have
And if I can get out of the little stuff, I'm
Because
okay. But when I
obviously-
think of like
He was
my
getting,
kids,
somebody was saying
I
something
deal
to
with
him too.
my kids that are
The real
disappointing me, they do
difficulty in
something
that
wrong.
situation would be how do
Whatever,
you resolve the conflict between the fact that Norma wants to
If I can
volunteer
approach them,
and she
Oh, I
wants
know.
to do things
I know.
the fact
and
that
nobody else
the reasons
really
bothers
wants her to
me
do
is
anything.
That's
You've
right.
got to utilize somebody's
I know,
will to
and,
serve.
and now that we're gone, I've noticed
what's the
she's
point?
in everything. Nobody is stopping her.
You know, if they get that,
And when
they
my
start to
friends go,
listen a little
oh
different.
my gosh,
And I think
Spencer's
that's
the new
what with
pastor, he didn't
anybody,
get the
you know,
memo.
if you
And she's like,
conflict with
but
somebody,
people don't take part in it.
and
I mean, like it's her ministry and
church or
for
friends,
some reason she was a
spouses
pastor.
or whatever, if you